She booked seat 1A fair and square. But when a Platinum Elite passenger demanded she move, what happened next sent shockwaves through the entire airline industry. Before we dive into this powerful story of grace, power, and dignity under pressure, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome to Mr. 7 Stories, where true stories meet real change. If you enjoy impactful tales that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. We bring you new stories every single day. Now, buckle in, because what happened on Flight 1143 is more than just a disagreement over a seat. It's a lesson the world needed to hear. The low hum of jet engines stretched like a familiar melody, echoing through the first-class cabin of Flight 1143 from New York to Copenhagen. Simone Ellis leaned gently into seat 1A, window seat, her favorite, the one she had reserved nearly 2 months ago. She drew in a long, slow breath, as if releasing an invisible weight from her chest after a week drained by back-to-back transatlantic meetings. At 39, Simone wasn't one to boast. But this moment, the sparkling lemon water in her hand, the golden light of sunset reflecting off the curved window pane, the soft Hermes scarf draped loosely around her neck, stood as proof. Proof of every sleepless night, every no she turned into a maybe, and every moment she was underestimated simply for being a woman, and a black woman at that. Born and raised in Southside Detroit, the youngest daughter of a nurse and a city bus driver, Simone wasn't raised to expect open doors. She was taught that if she wanted something, she'd have to knock with both fists. And if the door didn't open, she'd better be ready to break it down. Today, as founder and CEO of Luminar Tech, one of America's fastest-growing AI firms, Simone wasn't just seated in 1A of an international flight. She was seated on top of her own empire. A $300 million partnership deal with a Swiss conglomerate awaited her in Copenhagen. A deal that could push Luminar from promising to irreplaceable. A flight attendant approached with a chilled bottle of water and a warm smile. Simone nodded her thanks, flipping open the black leather notebook she always carried, the one where she mapped out strategies, scribbled down thoughts, and sometimes wrote things no one else ever knew. Her heart wasn't pounding from nerves. It was the rare rhythm of peace, a luxury for a woman who had spent her life fighting for space and for voice. But the calm lasted less than 4 minutes. The sound of the first-class cabin door clicked open and then closed again, softly, like a quiet exclamation point. But it was enough to slice through Simone's drifting thoughts. From up ahead came the rhythmic click of heels on the aircraft floor, slow, measured, and confident, as if the aisle itself had been tailored to fit that stride. Simone didn't need to look up to know. She had encountered this type thousands of times in high-level boardrooms. The sharp burst of expensive French perfume, the perfectly styled platinum blonde waves, and the air of someone who moved through the world believing it owed her something. "Oh no," the woman muttered, her voice high and crisp like cut glass. "Another system error?" Simone kept her gaze on the notebook, turning a page with quiet composure. But her eyes were now reading between the lines, reading the atmosphere. And what they read raised every silent alarm. The woman, whom Simone would later learn was Brooke Whitmore, a Platinum Elite member with the airline, came to a stop right beside seat 1A, where Simone was seated. Her eyes swept swiftly from Simone's neatly styled curls, down her elegant black suit, and finally landed on the seat itself. Simone caught the glance from the corner of her eye. But that was all she needed. She'd seen it before, that quick scan, the tight-lipped smile, the pause when the reality didn't match the expectation. Politeness wrapped around prejudice. She lowered her notebook and sat upright. Not out of intimidation, but because Simone Ellis had grown accustomed to looks like this. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to meet one. And as always, she had no intention of stepping aside. "Excuse me," Brooke began, her voice measured, pleasant even, but edged with entitlement. "I think there's been a mix-up. This seat is usually mine. I've flown this route every week for 5 years. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've been with Avalon Air for nearly 20 years." Simone lifted her gaze slowly. Her eyes, steady, calm, and unshakable, met the glinting confidence of the woman standing over her. "I understand," she replied evenly, her voice clear but quiet. "But this is the seat I booked 2 weeks ago." Brooke smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just thought, perhaps there might be another arrangement. I'm very accustomed to this seat. It helps me work more efficiently. I'm sure you understand how important that is." Simone returned the smile, cool, composed, like the first chill of winter. "Perfectly. That's exactly why I chose this seat." The air between them seemed to thicken, a thin sheen of tension like frost forming over a river beginning to crack. A few rows back, passengers paused, watching without watching. A flight attendant passed by, catching Brooke's eye, then glancing to Simone, and, perhaps out of instinct, slowed her steps. "Well then," Brooke said, her voice dropping, tone shifting, no longer a request but a test. "You're sure you want to keep this seat? Even knowing I'm more familiar with this route?" Simone nodded. Her eyes didn't flinch. "I'm sure." The silence that followed was not awkward, it was anticipatory. A hush before the ripple of impact. And Simone knew this was only the surface. The undercurrent would come from somewhere farther back in the cabin. The atmosphere in first class aboard Flight 1143 from New York to Copenhagen tightened like a drawn bowstring. Simone Ellis looked up from her half-finished memo as the flight attendant returned with a professionally forced smile. Behind her, Brooke Whitmore stood with arms crossed, her eyes razor-sharp as they flicked down to the boarding pass in her hand. "Miss Ellis," the flight attendant began, her voice soft, almost as if afraid to shatter the fragile air between them. "Would you be willing to help us resolve this situation a bit more smoothly? Mrs. Whitmore is a long-time loyalty member, and she has certain preferences when flying, such as always sitting in 1A. We're simply trying to maintain the best experience for both parties." Simone paused, her silence deliberate, as if measuring the depth of a still lake before stepping in. Then, she calmly placed a hand on the tray table and lifted her gaze. "And I'm not a customer?" Her voice was low, steady, not loud, but it still made the flight attendant shrink back a little. "That's not what I meant," the attendant hurried to clarify. "It's just, Mrs. Whitmore is having a very difficult day, and we thought maybe if I gave up my seat," Simone finished for her, her face unreadable, "then this would all go away." From behind, Brooke interjected, "Exactly. Someone like me is used to being in this seat. It's not personal, it's just tradition." Simone turned toward her, eyes like a still lake at dawn, calm, but with depths no one could see. "Maybe you're used to sitting in 1A. But I paid for this seat. And I'm not used to paying just to be asked to give it up." Brooke scoffed, turning to the flight attendant. "See? She's trying to turn a small misunderstanding into a war." Simone didn't answer. She quietly opened her bag, pulled out her boarding pass on a tablet, and placed it on the tray. "Reservation code. Ticket number. Seat 1A. If there's a mistake here, it's not mine. And I'm not going to fix the system's error with my deference." The atmosphere thickened. Nearby passengers paused mid-sip, mid-swipe, mid-conversation. Their eyes weren't hostile, but they weren't exactly supportive either. They just watched. The flight attendant gave a small, embarrassed bow and stepped back. Simone turned her gaze to the window. Outside, the morning sun stretched golden light across the tarmac. She thought of all the times she'd been asked to step aside, in boardrooms, on conference stages, at dinner tables with men who thought she was lucky rather than deserving. Not once did she bow. And today would be no different. The air in first class congealed after Simone's refusal. Her voice had been quiet, her expression calm, but her resolve sent an invisible shockwave through the cabin. Brooke Whitmore withdrew her hand, lips tightening into a distorted smile, but her eyes, those eyes, flashed like a blade that had just been insulted. About 5 minutes later, as Simone quietly turned a page in her leather-bound notebook, a middle-aged flight attendant approached. Her eyes swept the cabin quickly before landing on Simone with a practiced, uneasy smile. "Good evening, Miss Ellis. I'm Veronica, the in-flight service manager," the woman began, her voice soft but rehearsed. "We were hoping you might consider relocating to seat 2C. Just for a few minutes, to help maintain a pleasant atmosphere for everyone on board. Simone looked up slowly, her eyes calmly studying the woman in front of her. Not angry, not surprised. Just the kind of gaze women like her had learned to perfect over decades. A gaze that forces people to rethink every assumption they just made. You mean the flight will be more pleasant if I vacate the seat I lawfully reserved and paid for? Simone asked, her tone flat, each word carved with clarity. Veronica bit her lower lip. No, And am I the one who caused discomfort? Or was it the woman who asked me to leave my seat because she believes she always sits in one? Silence bloomed for a moment. From afar, Brooke watched the exchange intently, her gaze sharp and cutting, like she was trying to fracture every unspoken barrier with sheer will. For a brief second, Simone could see the conflict flash in Veronica's eyes. Protect the airline's VIP, or stand with what's right. Then, as if retreating to neutral ground, Veronica stepped back. I understand. Thank you for your clarity, Miss Ellis, she said, before turning away, her face taut with quiet frustration. It seemed the tension had settled, until suddenly, the cockpit door opened. A man in a captain's uniform stepped out, composed but clearly displeased. He exchanged a few hushed words with Veronica, then turned to Simone. We need to reassess the situation to ensure the flight proceeds smoothly, he said, voice cool and diplomatic. It appears you're the one declining to cooperate? For the first time, Simone's brow furrowed slightly. I'm not cooperating with having my rightful seat taken from me. The captain exhaled audibly. We'll be forced to file a formal incident report if this isn't resolved within 10 minutes. Simone said nothing. She simply picked up her phone, scrolled to a name in her contacts. A flicker passed through her eyes, not anger, but calculation. Then let's see who gets to resolve this, she whispered. She pressed the call button. The screen lit up, Victoria Langley, Avalon Air. Without a hint of hesitation, Simone raised the phone to her ear. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin froze mid-breath. Those who had been sneaking glances were now openly staring. They didn't know who she was calling, but the confidence in her posture made one thing clear. This was no idle call. Things were about to shift. Victoria, it's Simone Ellis, she said, her voice calm and steady. I'm aboard flight 1143 to Copenhagen, seat 1A, and I've just been asked by the flight crew to give up my seat to a platinum elite passenger because she usually sits here. There was a pause on the other end, just a few seconds. Then Victoria's voice came through, tight with alarm. They did what? They're calling it cooperating for the sake of harmony. That includes the flight supervisor and the captain. A sharp exhale. Give me 5 minutes, Simone. Simone ended the call, her expression unreadable. But in her eyes, something had ignited. She turned toward the window, arms folded. No one needed to ask who she had called. The energy in the room said it all. This was no longer about a seat. It was about something bigger. Just minutes later, the intercom buzzed to life. The flight was temporarily delayed due to procedural technicalities. A ripple of murmurs spread across the cabin. Some passengers sighed. Others glanced toward seat 1A, their once judgmental eyes shifting toward curiosity, then suspicion. That's when two people appeared at the front of the cabin. Both dressed in sharp black suits. One was Troy Sanders, Vice President of Executive Customer Relations. The other, Elena Park, Director of Internal Compliance, a name rarely seen outside of formal investigations into major corporate image concerns. Veronica, the flight supervisor, visibly paled. Miss Ellis, Elena said, stepping forward. May I have a moment of your time, privately, if possible? Simone rose smoothly and followed them toward the galley. No one could hear the conversation. But 5 minutes later, she returned, calm, composed, and still in seat 1A. This time, it was Troy who addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a serious internal matter, several crew members will be immediately replaced to ensure the continued quality of service. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Brooke Whitmore's eyes widened. Her complexion faded as she watched Veronica and the captain quietly gather their belongings, escorted out of the cabin by two plainclothes security agents. Those who had once sided with her sat silent, like passengers who had just witnessed an emergency landing they weren't prepared for. Simone didn't smile. She didn't need to, because real power doesn't shout. It simply arrives, on time and in the right hands. The air in the cabin felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. Veronica, the flight supervisor who had once tried to persuade Simone to give up the seat for the sake of harmony, now descended the aircraft stairs in silence. Just ahead of her walked the captain, a man who minutes earlier held command of the entire flight, now the first to be dismissed from the cockpit over one discriminatory decision. But the eye of the storm hadn't passed. Simone hadn't spoken a word since returning to her seat, but her gaze said everything. There was no hatred, no rage, just the quiet, unflinching truth of a woman long accustomed to confronting prejudice without ever lowering her head. From seat 2C, Brooke Whitmore turned towards Simone once more. But gone was the aloof, aristocratic stare of the entitled. What replaced it was unease, like someone realizing they'd been walking across thin ice, and the cracking sound had just begun beneath their heels. "This is insane," Brooke whispered, voice low, as if trying to keep the words between just the two of them. "I didn't think they'd react like this over a seat." Simone didn't turn. Her voice came soft but firm, eyes still focused out the window. "It was never about the seat, Mrs. Whitmore. It was about how you believed you deserved it more than I did, just because I don't look like you." Before Brooke could respond, a uniformed staff member approached, holding a tablet and a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said calmly, "I represent the Avalon Air Passenger Conduct Oversight Board. I've been instructed to hand-deliver a formal disciplinary notice." Brooke's eyes narrowed. "Disciplinary? I was just protecting my rights as a loyal customer." The man remained composed. "We've reviewed reports from staff, fellow passengers, and in-cabin surveillance. Your behavior, marked by discriminatory remarks, provocation, and disruption, violated our code of conduct for premium passengers." Brooke rose to her feet, voice rising in protest. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've flown Avalon for 17 years. I spend 6 figures a year on international routes. You can't treat me like this." The man didn't waver. "Precisely because you're a Platinum Elite member, we're obligated to uphold the highest standard of conduct." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen, a digital notice revoking her elite status and ordering immediate removal from the flight. First class went silent. Brooke turned her gaze to Simone, as if searching for a foothold, a reason, even an excuse to remain. But all she found was a calm, unreadable expression, like the world had finally corrected itself, and justice no longer bowed its head. And so, under the gaze of more than 20 passengers, Brooke Whitmore was escorted from her seat. Alone. Stripped of status. Stripped of privilege. Left only with a lesson, one she should have learned long ago. The cabin door clicked shut behind Brooke Whitmore, a sharp, final sound that echoed the end of an era of untouchable privilege. Simone Ellis leaned back into seat 1A, the same seat she had reserved and held with calm resolve and unwavering dignity. There was no celebration, no smirk of victory, no glance of disdain toward the woman escorted off the aircraft in a storm of entitlement. Instead, Simone reopened her tablet, navigating to the partnership contract awaiting her in Copenhagen, the real reason for this flight. She typed a few notes into the document, her hands steady, her pulse unshaken. A few rows back, an older gentleman in a gray suit, likely an executive of some financial firm, leaned forward slightly in his seat. "Ms. Ellis," he said in a low, respectful voice. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Not everyone can stand their ground the way you did." Simone nodded politely, her demeanor composed as ever. "No thanks needed, sir. I simply did what anyone should." Across the aisle, a middle-aged Asian woman bowed her head in agreement. "I saw everything, and I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner." That quiet admission, almost reflexive, rippled through the cabin like a spark catching dry air. The once avoided eye contact now shifted, open, intentional. Those who had stayed silent out of fear of confrontation now felt a weight they couldn't ignore. A young flight attendant, the same one who had smiled nervously while serving Simone earlier, approached again. She placed a steaming cup of herbal tea and a warm towel on the tray table. "I'm sorry, Miss Ellis," she whispered, eyes downcast. "I should have stood on the right side from the beginning." Simone offered no reprimand, no reassurance. She simply placed her hand around the teacup, letting the warmth seep into her palm, a quiet acceptance of an apology deeper than words. A few seats behind, a young Latino man pulled out his phone, opening his social media app. Less than a minute later, his tweet was making waves. Watched a black woman CEO asked to give up her first-class seat for a wealthy white platinum elite. She held her ground, and the whole cabin fell silent. Respect is not negotiable. The story was no longer confined to the airplane. It was leaving the terminal, crossing time zones, and landing on thousands of screens. Simone knew this, but she also knew this had never been about virality or headlines or trending hashtags. It was always about something deeper, the enduring truth that when one person holds their dignity, the world around them is forced to check its own reflection. The aircraft began pulling away from the gate. Passengers fastened their seatbelts, the "no devices" sign lit up. But something brighter than any indicator light filled the cabin now. The awareness that this flight would be remembered as more than a physical journey. It was a turning point, a moment where someone lost privilege and someone else reclaimed her rightful place. Simone closed her eyes. In the quiet hum of first class, between the soft whir of jet engines and the faint clink of teacups, she felt the full truth of it. People may try to take everything from you, your seat, your recognition, even your respect. But no one can take the dignity you choose to keep. And tonight, that dignity said it all. 2 weeks after that flight, Avalon Air held an unprecedented press conference. Victoria Langley, the airline's senior executive officer, and the very person Simone Ellis had called mid-flight, stood at the podium, her face taut with resolve. Before dozens of news cameras, she made a rare admission. "We made a mistake. But from that mistake, we have a chance to do right, not just by Simone Ellis, but by every person who has ever felt dismissed on one of our flights." Immediately following her statement, the airline announced a sweeping set of policy changes. All frontline staff would undergo updated training focused on racial equity, unconscious bias, and handling sensitive situations with dignity and professionalism. An independent advisory council, including representatives from communities of color, sociologists, and longtime customers, would be formed to directly monitor service quality and report to executive leadership. And most notably, a new internal policy would be introduced, the Ellis Clause, a formal commitment to equitable complaint resolution between passengers, enshrined in the airline's official operating manual. Across media platforms, Simone was hailed as a symbol of grace and resolve. But she remained silent. No interviews. No public appearances. Just one post on her social media. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just don't want anyone else to feel pushed aside, dismissed, or overlooked because they don't fit someone else's idea of who deserves priority. Respect is not a reward. It's a basic right." The post went viral. Within 24 hours, the hashtag #Seat1A became a rallying cry for the right to be seen, to be heard, to take up space without having to shout for acknowledgement. And today, as the press conference aired live, Simone wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. Her actions, calm, unwavering, and quietly firm, had spoken already. Loud enough, deep enough, strong enough to shift an entire system. In the quiet of her private office, she watched the live stream on her laptop. There were no applause tracks, no cheers of triumph, just the soft hint of a smile as it passed across her lips. Resolute. Beside her computer, the old leather-bound notebook still lay open. The page showed the words she had written that day, moments before Brooke stepped into the first-class cabin. "Dignity is never something we owe in exchange for keeping the peace." Outside, the world remained full of injustice. But Simone knew, as long as enough people stood up, with reason, with restraint, with dignity, change was no longer a dream. It had started with a seat, and it would continue by refusing to give up space to prejudice ever again.